Welcome, advocates, to another episode of the Lead in Equity Podcast, a podcast that focuses on supporting educators with the tools and resources necessary to ensure equity at their schools. Today's special guest is Erin Sanchez and Micki Evans. Without further ado, Erin, Micki, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm excited for today's topic. We've actually had your colleague on, Charity Moran, has been on a few times, and she talked about your book. And so I'm bringing you on as well. So I'm really excited to continue this conversation. I'm going to start with Micki. I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you currently do.
Okay. I'm going to actually take it back a ways. I got involved in place-based learning after getting kicked out of 2 high schools and ended up in an alternative school. And the teachers were doing all place-based learning. And so it really got what people called the misfits out into the community and got us really connected and empowered our voice within the community. So people began to change their narrative that they had about kids that were going to the quote dropout school. So that was where my journey began. And so I decided I wanted to become a teacher because it was life-changing for me. And so I've used place-based learning in the classroom, in higher ed as well. And it's been something that has been really dear to my heart. I've done some work with reservations, Native American tribes throughout the country, and found that it was just a way to really help students, youth, connect themselves to their community. So currently I do professional development in both project-based learning and place-based learning, and place-based learning is really where my passion is.
Awesome. All right. Well, Erin, why don't you share a little bit about yourself and what you currently do?
So I started my teaching career 25 years ago in my hometown of 739 people in rural Minnesota. And I was lucky enough to begin my career at a self-directed project-based school. So students design projects from their own passions. Students aligned those projects to standards. They carried them out across the community, sometimes across the country, like paddle boating down the Mississippi River, doing water quality testing, and bringing horses onto campus to demonstrate hippotherapy. And it really spoiled me to teach anywhere else, but my passion was teaching Native American learners. And so to serve that population, I moved to Washington State, and I taught in environments where project-based learning and place-based learning weren't really happening. And I kind of shut my door and did the best I could. And then I found a little school south of Seattle that was doing place-based learning very well, but it was teacher directed. So I was designing the projects, I was aligning them to standards, I was making those community connections, and I found out how challenging it was. So I did that for a number of years, and Micki and I, our paths crossed about 20 years ago. We both realized that there was kind of this void around place-based learning, especially in project-based spaces. And so we created PBL Path to meet that need, and have been working in collaboration ever since. I've also been a project-based learning coach for tribal schools, and I've been with the Buck Institute for Education, or PBL Works, for about 14 years now as well.
Oh, great. I feel honored to have such prestigious folks on the show here. So thank you. And by the way, folks, Erin and Micki are both co-authors, and Charity is also an author as well, with place-based learning. Link in the show notes, connecting inquiry, community, and culture. So make sure you grab yourself a copy of the book that is currently out as we speak. All right. So Micki, I heard you say place-based learning a few times in your introduction. And so I want to start there because yes, we did have Charity on, your colleague, and she described it as well. But for those who may not be as familiar or just kind of need a refresher, I want to start there. Why don't you share with us what is place-based learning? And let's even add in maybe the differences between place-based learning and project-based learning.
So in our view, place-based learning is multifaceted. It's really about individuals, collective, as well as physical places, time, memory, traditions, and stories, as well as identities and cultures. And so within place-based learning, we really focus on that and look at ways to tie students, learners, to their community, to really uncover the stories, the untold stories, maybe the mistold stories in their community as a way, we call it community story mapping, as a way to identify what some of the challenges and the assets within the community, and then building projects from that of course are aligned with standards, but it's really connecting. We call it the pedagogy of connectedness, because it's really connecting students to place. And we take time, what's your place story? Really uncovering place stories within the context of place-based learning.
Great answer. You covered it all. Thank you so much. So here's my thing. I'm curious because when I hear place-based learning and kind of the way you described it, and as you kind of talked about, the two of you both say, hey, I have experience working on reservations, Native American, indigenous cultures. And so I'm assuming that it makes a lot of sense if you're working with certain groups of people. Is place-based learning applicable for multi-dimensional backgrounds of students, or is it more specific to certain groups of people? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's applicable to all students, all learners, whether they be young learners or adult learners in all spaces. It's more how much like unpacking or unlearning needs to be done to be able to make space for place-based learning. And oftentimes, both Micki and I have found that in Indigenous spaces, there isn't so much unlearning that needs to be done. I mean, that colonial mindset and working through that. But oftentimes, it's like, yes, they're already having a hunting camp and going on canoe journey, and it just hasn't been connected to traditional schooling. So it's more making those connections, where sometimes in non-Indigenous spaces, it's explaining like, this is how you connect the community with students' lived experiences and with their histories and with their cultures.
So there's, I guess, from what I'm hearing is depending on the setting is just kind of the target as far as what needs to be explained or where the places need to. So like for one group, you might be explaining like, here, I want you to try to see if you can connect to your own personal community. And then maybe in another group, you might be saying, how does your situation or how can you, I guess, relate maybe to this group of people? I guess I wasn't clear exactly. Micki, look like you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, so I have an example. The alternative school I went to, one of the first place-based learning projects we did, I grew up on an island off of Seattle, and it was the space and the place that the first Japanese were interned, during World War II. And so that was our journey. And so I had tons of Japanese families that lived on and tons of Japanese friends. And so it was an opportunity for me to learn about the resilience as well as the history of it, how community came together to support them, and at other times how community fell apart. So for me, it was, even though I'm not Japanese, but I understood my dentist who grew up in an intern camp, incarcerated, basically. So for me, it was, and we had all walks of life in our alternative school. So for all of us, it was this common knowledge, and really hit on social injustice, right? Race and equity.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes sense. All right. So let's talk about the community side of things. Erin, I'm going to throw this one at you because it sounds like, and I'm just going off of appearance. Now, Micki did say she doesn't identify as Japanese. As I'm looking at you, I'm not sure if you identified as Indigenous, but it sounds like if you are wanting to have an authentic experience for your students, you want to bring in individuals with some of those lived experiences that you're teaching about or talking about, which means you're going to probably have to involve the community within some of your lessons and things like that. So I want to start with you, Erin, as far as what are some ways that we can connect with community members with place-based learning, and maybe even add to it with why is that even important?
Okay. The importance will come out in the examples that I give of the how. And the how is to start with the experts in your classroom. I think oftentimes we miss the cultural expertise that our students carry, and we're so focused on our content that we forget that we have this room full of experts. And so the process of community asset mapping, which we talk about in our book, begins in the classroom, finding out what students value and what expertise they carry. So it might be that a student works in her grandparents' Filipino bakery on the weekends and knows how to bake all of these items that are culturally significant. Or another student goes to the Dene Nation in the summer and helps family members weave, traditional weaving. And so once a teacher has a deeper understanding of the assets in the classroom, then they can begin to shape place-based experiences around that. And then the next layer might be family. So what expertise does families have that could be brought into the classroom? And then doing that community asset map where maybe you're taking a community walk, a neighborhood walk, and figuring out, okay, where are our mechanics shops? And what is the history of this mural on the side of this bank? And you broaden that. And as a school leader, one of the greatest gifts that you can give to classroom teachers is to develop kind of a community asset database, put out letters saying, this is what our students do. This is what place-based learning is. Like, are you willing to help? Are you willing to step into the classroom? Or do you have an issue that students might be able to help you solve? So kind of these different layers, connecting with the community, but starting with students.
So starting with the students. So that means you got to get to know them somehow. So
Yeah.
you said the asset mapping, is that kind of the idea? Like, is it kind of like a survey, how you do beginning of the year type of thing? It's like, tell us a little bit about yourself, what language, home language, those kind of questions, or is there something else?
We couch it under place stories. What's your place story? And tell us about your connection to this place, because then that really begins to get at what their stories are. And stories are so powerful in terms of getting to know and understand someone.
Gotcha.
You might ask them to like visually represent a place of importance to them too, and they can create counter maps before maybe you even introduce the concept of counter mapping, but they have these maps of places of significance in their heads and how they express that as well. I always have like a wonder wall in my classroom too, where they're just putting questions, they're adding questions to that, things they're really curious about. So not only their expertise, but also just their innate curiosity. And I might build an entire project just from one of those questions that winds up on the wonder wall.
You got to tell me more about this wonder wall, Erin. What is that? Describe it a little bit more, please.
Oh, for sure. So lots of times students have great questions, but they might not ask them at the right time or the right time as far as the teacher is concerned. But they'd be like, well, why does this work that way? Or how come, when I go down to the casino, it doesn't seem like my culture is represented, even though the casino is part of the tribe. And so I'll say, oh, that's an awesome question. Like, add that to our wonder wall. And then eventually I've collected these questions and I can mine those questions then for project ideas.
So I wish I had known about this when I was teaching second grade. The one year I taught second grade, that would have been helpful. So Micki, I hear that we start with students, get their information, understand them, the backgrounds. How do we ask, like, is there a way that we should ask our students, are you okay if us sharing your culture, or is that something that we just make automatic assumptions that we want to like highlight? I think sometimes when we want to provide stuff, a representation for our students, we just kind of assume that that's what we want them, or that's what they want, which sometimes some students, they might feel ostracized, or they might feel like, some of the responses may come in, so it may make them feel uncomfortable because the stuff that they like to do or their customs might be deemed as not traditional or not normal for maybe what mainstream might view as normal. So are there questions that we ask our students as far as sharing and as far as their level of comfort?
So we don't want to assume. I definitely don't believe we want to assume. And once again, it gets through storytelling. In the book, we talk about the selfie project, and that was actually shared with me from a friend who were at the beginning of the school year. As a teacher, I put together a slide show about my places that I'm interested in, things about food that I like, things about my culture. And then the students do the same thing. It's a way of sharing their stories using selfies, so to speak. So it's a great way to begin to build that trust right from the get-go in the classroom. But for the sharing, we have to really have our eyes on how do we create a classroom that is based on trust and trusting relationships, teacher to student, student to student. So really attending to that.
Okay, well, that makes sense. So let's talk about some of the barriers that might be involved, right? So obviously we want to get to know our students first. We start there. We want to invite some of the community members out there. Erin, what are some of the barriers that we might face as educators when it comes to the place-based learning and connecting with the community?
Well, this connects perfectly to the last question too, because the very first barrier is teacher mindset and teacher bias around not only students and their potential, but the potential of community partners, and just giving up a little bit of that perceived control of the classroom environment to allow others to come in and be the teachers. So firstly, teachers just really looking at, yes, they're responsible for student outcomes, but if they deeply understand their students' strengths and needs and interests, that they can effectively customize the learning, and that those community assets are just yet another resource to support students in their learning. So firstly, we go in depth in the book as to how to uncover some of those hidden biases that we might have as educators around inviting others into the classroom or seeing our students as experts. And then once we've done that inner work and that reflective work, which not that we're ever done, it's ongoing, but then we can start to look at some of the structures that might be presenting a barrier to place-based learning.
What type of biases could a teacher have in regards to some of the community?
Oh gosh. I mean, their knowledge of the standards. And I know that sounds strange, but sometimes we hold our content very close to us. We forget that it is used in the world outside of K-12 education. And so we might think, oh, if I were to bring in a statistician to talk to my students about how to analyze this data that we collected, it's going to take too much time, and they really don't understand what that's going to look like on a standardized test. And granted, they might not, but seeing how absolutely beneficial it is to see how that content lives in people's professions, right? Lives in the work that they do every day that benefits the community. And so, yeah, even biases like that, or just we want our schools to be really safe environments. And oftentimes community partners have to jump through a lot of hoops to be able to get clearance to even be on campus, which can be a barrier, but it also is a bias, assuming that everybody who comes onto campus might not be safe. And so that's where leadership kind of comes in as well and says, okay, I can remove some of these physical barriers or make it a little easier for our campus walls to be permeable and allow for these experts to come on board.
Can I share an example around some of these perceived assumptions? I was working with a school up north that bordered the Lumping Reservation, and we were getting ready for student-led conferences. And so I've been coaching the school. And one teacher said, well, those parents never show up. They never come. They really don't care. It kind of took me aback. And I said, well, let's unpack that. I wonder why they're not coming. One, do they have transportation? Can they get up the hill and go to school? Two, what was their experience when they went through school in this district? And so I formed a committee, and we went down and met with tribal council. We suggested bringing the conferences to the reservation. And so we held them in the round. We had aunties, parents, cousins, sisters, siblings, served food, had a raffle, and we had over 95% attendance for that student-led conference. So it's just kind of unpacking what those perceived assumptions are that are biased, right?
Well, I hope the teacher was there and saw that, because those are the comments, unfortunately, that other teachers, like that one might have been vocal, that teacher might have been vocal, but then you never know, there might have been other teachers and staff that might have felt the same way. And so just seeing the participation and seeing, yeah, it is possible, but we also have to keep in mind that sometimes as educators, we do things that's convenient for us. So we offer IEP meetings during this school day when we're at work, as opposed to at our school, not considering like So I used to work on a res too a few years back and doing special ed. This is why I'm bringing this up, because I remember some of these days where I literally would have a parent say, hey, I don't have the gas to get in to do the IEP meeting, but I still want to be involved. So it's not like the parent didn't care, just they literally didn't have the gas or a way to the school. So, okay, so how do we make this work for this parent? So I'm sad that the conversation had to come up, but I'm glad that it did come up, because then you saw that, oh, maybe there's some areas for growth for us, and it seemed very successful. So I'm glad all that worked out for you.
It transformed the school culture. So we made connections with alumni archives, and we would change out photos over the years that they had. There was a welcoming of canoe journey, rather than going, oh, those kids are not showing up to school because they're out there practicing. So it really transformed the culture. And all of a sudden, all those Native American boys that were in that one classroom down in the basement were integrated into other classrooms, right? So it was really transformative for the kids as well as the non-Native kids.
Got you. All right. So Erin, I'm sorry, we went down a lane. So I'm sorry for cutting you off earlier. But
No, that's okay.
could you share some more barriers that might be in place when it comes to connecting with the community?
Yeah, one of the biggest barriers and sometimes the toughest to overcome is the schedule, the school schedule. And depending on how rigid that schedule is, especially at secondary, you maybe got 6-7 periods a day, and you're trying to fit a place-based learning journey into a 55 minute period, makes it really challenging to involve those community partners in a rich and robust way. But we provide some avenues for what that could look like. I mean, even planning a project with one other teacher, so it's interdisciplinary, and using PLC time in order to design this place-based learning experience, and getting one community partner to come in during a class and videotaping that class, and having all those subsequent classes watch the video of that community partner coming in. Maybe they've submitted questions in advance to be able to have their questions asked of the community partner. So there are ways around it. And then as schedules get a little bit more permeable, maybe you're combining 2 class periods and having a block where you might have enough time to be able to take that initial community walk, or head down to the hatchery and work with the hatchery to raise salmon roe and release them into a stream. Just a little bit more time. And then as place-based learning grows and people see the power of it and it becomes synonymous with schooling, then leaders tend to see, okay, I can create a schedule that has more versatility, that has more openness to it, to allow for these richer place-based experiences. But it doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it's a 3 to 5 year process to be able to create that in a schedule. But I always say to teachers, even if you have to start small, just in your classroom, even in 1 or 2 periods during the day, I mean, that's something. Starting small is just fine. We like that. We support that.
That was going to be my next question. Could barrier be time? Because it sounds like I can hear some of the teachers thinking oh, this sounds amazing, but that means I might have to connect with the local hatchery, or I might have to connect with the local this or that, and the schedules align, and make sure that they can come in during our class period. And is time one of those barriers? And if so, it sounds like there are some ways around that. Is that right, Micki?
Yeah, I mean, we can use different technologies. We can use VR, AR, XR as a way to connect students with different places within their community. Nat Geo has a program that they do, ArcGIS, where they're actually mapping the community, and then they can capture stories of community members. So there are different ways that we can use technologies rather than having to just bring them in. What I love about a face-to-face is that relationship building. And like Erin was saying, by working with different partners, students begin to see different career pathways that they may never have thought about. So it's kind of working with some of these mentors.
Got you. All right. Well, we've talked about what place-based learning is, ways that we can connect with the community members, some barriers that we might face. I'd love to kind of wrap things up with some strategies that we can share with the audience members that are listening. Of course, folks, we want you to grab the book, place-based learning. Again, link in the show notes. But let's start with Erin. Could you share some strategies, again, final strategies that you want to share with the audience out there in regards to tapping into the community?
The most effective strategy that I have found is figuring out what students care about and how they see their community and their places. So most of my teaching experience, I was teaching in a community where I was not a part of the culture, whether that was in Indigenous spaces or just teaching Black and Brown students in urban places. And I saw that place very differently than they did. And so taking the time at the beginning of the year to, like Micki said, really listen to their place stories and know that place from their perspective was critical. Like I always started with this like mini project called A Day in the Life, where they would tell me what a day in their life looked like and they would capture that in images. So it was like a photojournalism story or a photo essay, because I wanted to know from their perspective, what was schooling like? What was taking the city bus in the morning, getting siblings ready for school? Like, what did their day consist of? So just that deep knowledge and understanding of who students are and basing any sort of place-based journey around that understanding.
All right. What about you, Mick?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Probably one of the greatest successes I had when I was working with secondary students is I actually had a committee of students that did the reach out to community members. And it was far more effective than myself reaching out. And you can even do that with middle schoolers and some of the upper 4th and 5th grade students as well. And like Erin said earlier, to build that database. And you want to make sure you're not just using this partner once. Thinking about an evergreen place-based journey where you can continue to work with that partner and the relationship is built along the way. So those are some of the strategies that we've used that we have found to be effective.
All right. Well, this has been a very informative conversation and a really good continuation. And folks, I'm going to leave the links for Charity's 2 episodes where she talked about project-based learning. She talked about place-based learning as well. So that you can listen to the 3-part series, if you will, on place-based learning and everything that's around it. We're going to just wrap things up. Erin, I would love for you to share any final words of advice to our listeners that are out there.
Oh, goodness. Just start small and start with your students and have a blast. Like it's so much fun just to see them come to life, and it's a different environment when you get those community partners in the room. So.
And when you really empower student voice, and so it really becomes a call to action, and the kids get so engaged in that. And yes, absolutely, start small. You don't have to do a whole big old place-based learning journey. Start with something small and work with your community partners.
Yeah, start small, folks. You don't have to do this extravagant thing for the first time. Start small and build from there. That's a good takeaway from today. If we have some folks that want to connect with you, Micki, what's the best way to reach you online?
They can reach me through my email, Micki@pblpath.com. PBL Path has an Instagram, which is not the way, but a Facebook page, and through LinkedIn as well. Through PBL Path as well as my name.
And our website too. So if you remember we're PBL Path, we're at pblpath.com.
There it is. All right. Well, Erin and Micki, has truly been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sheldon. Pleasure.